started.
Yeah.
Peter, you are.
Thanks. Yes, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, I would say. And it's true that I had Annemette, when she thought she was going to be a classical pianist, she turned out to be a jazz bass player. She had the bass with me as a side.
Nebenfach.
Nebenfach. And so that's very nice. Just to tell you who I am basically a bass player and a composer, and I'm a professor at the Royal Academy of Music in Aarhus in that respect. But I also have another education with a master's in mathematics and a bachelor's in French, and I also have one in music. And then my PhD is in neuroscience. And for that I run a Center for Music in the Brain in Aarhus, Denmark. I have 35 employees, I have large grants. You know, it's much easier to get grants for doing brain science than for making records. I wish it would be easier to get money for making records. But anyway, so that's what I do on a daily basis. I run this center, and then I play gigs in the evening on my bass. That's a very beautiful combination. But I'm going to give you 2 lectures today. I'm going to talk about the brain. Of course, I've called both of the lectures Groove on the Brain. I'll get to groove, what happens in the brain when the music really grooves in the second part. But the first, I'm going to talk about the brain and creativity, because I think that's a very interesting topic that we have done a lot of work with. But before we get to that, I'll just show you that this is my center. This is this nice building back here. These are some of the other professors in my center. And basically, this is, yeah, we'll get to that just in a short while. But before we go on, if I can make this go away, then I would like to do a little bit of music with you. I taught ear training and theory at the conservatory for many years. And one of the things, I'll start with a very nice ear training exercise that you can use before you play, for instance. So please sit up, and you have to sing. So, and this is a very easy exercise. You can all do it, but it's a very nice exercise to open your ears. What you're supposed to be doing? Standing up. Yeah, that's good. We want to do that. It's not difficult. What you have to do is you have to sing all the avoid notes on a C major chord. So which is pretty easy, and you all know that all the avoid notes on a C major chord is, of course, a D flat pentatonic. So you have to sing these avoid notes, but then you have to release them 1/2 step up. So, okay, ready? It's easy. It goes like this. Open your ears to these notes that are not normal. By the way, if you have a then the avoid notes are the pentatonic, the minor pentatonic 1/2 step up. So if you really want to play outside, that's pretty easy. You just take it 1/2 step up. Anyway, the idea about this is, of course, that when you do this thing, what happens is that you think, oh, it's such a relief to get to the 9th of the chord. It's so nice. And this is very interesting, because it's something that every, at least Western person would feel. But the animals, they don't care at all. I mean, there's this very nice study by a friend of mine who's called Josh McDermott, an American researcher. He did this study where he had this cage, sort of this kind of long cage, where he puts in monkeys, for instance, and then in one end of the cage he would be playing something like this, and in the other end of the cage he would play something like this. Maybe not like that, but you get the picture. So dissonance here and consonance here, and the monkeys, he then videotaped them. They didn't care. They were just walking around this cage, straight cage, but they would be walking around. But then he did the same thing with a bunch of people, and they would all move to the nice, to the consonant chords, except for Animeta. But they would all, and my son, by the way, but they would all move to the nice chords. So it's very interesting. As human beings, we have this subconscious, or whatever it is, way of being able to understand music, get some emotions from music. And by the way, you know, some of the things we know with music and humans is that the thing that makes this work is the compound dopamine. You know, all have heard about dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter. Dopamine is sort of, it goes with the name, right? Dope. It's what rewards you when you do something which is good for your survival, right? So when you eat really good food, you get dopamine in the brains, because it's to make sure that you're actually surviving, right? Or when you have sex, there's a lot of dopamine in the brains. That's good for the survival of the species, right? But also when we listen to music and you know, we have this thing, the chills, you can say, the shivers down the spines, this very nice place. You also have this release of dopamine in the brains. And this is very interesting, because how come? The animals, they don't care, but we sort of have this. Is music good for our survival? Yeah, in 4 hours from now I'll tell you whether that's true or not, whether music is good for our survival, but it's something that we get pleasure from. It's very strange. How come? So, but one thing, one part of this equation is something that we know a lot about, because one of the things that you were experiencing before when I tried to give you maybe not pleasure, but at least some kind of release, what's actually happening here? Yeah, what is happening is the same thing as when I do this thing. It's very nice when it comes down to this one. We need this to go down. And here we can actually understand a little bit more what this is about, because this is about predicting what is going to happen just in a short while, right? When we're on the dominant chord, we're predicting that it's not going to end there, right? So our brains are constantly trying to seek out for the future. And that's good for our survival, right? Being able to predict the future. And here comes the thing. This is basically what our brains are doing all the time while we're walking around. We're not actually thinking about this, but it's trying to predict what comes next. Even when I'm speaking, you're predicting the next word that I'm going to say, right? And that's completely necessary for our survival. That's actually why we survive as a species better than other species, because we can predict on a very long term, and we can use a lot of the stuff that we have learned in our life and that other people have experienced in their lives to be able to predict the future. We are specifically good at that as a species. And when we listen to music here, how come that we actually get this pleasure? Yeah, that's because we have to learn to predict the future. And in order to learn to predict the future, we have dopamine as a neurotransmitter. Because dopamine rewards us for predicting the future. And I want to try to explain to you how we know this. We know this from monkeys. These monkey studies, you take a monkey. In English, there's a difference between monkey and apes. I'm not quite sure about this thing, but at least we call it a monkey in Danish. Take a monkey, you take off a little bit of its sort of skull, and you put in electrodes and find the dopamine system. So now you can record directly from the dopamine system. It's still alive, not for long though, but it's still alive. And don't worry, you don't do this in Germany. I've seen it in Mexico once. It's really fascinating. But it was actually a German researcher called Wolfram Schulz who did these studies. And what he did was that now we have sort of found the dopamine system in the brains. Then you give them a little bit of juice that they really like, with this thing in the mouth, right? You give them juice, and when they get the juice, the dopamine system goes rrrr. So that was really nice, this juice. What Wolfram did then was that he then started flashing a light, 2 seconds, then give it this juice, flashing a light, giving the juice, and when he had done that for a little while, then the signal actually goes to the flashing of the light, and then it's flat, the dopamine is flat when it gets the juice. So, and if you don't give it the juice, then what happens is that it goes down, right? Once you're expecting something, then you really, then you want it, right? Then you get dissatisfied if you don't get it. So now the monkey has learned to predict the future. It predicts that it gets the juice, right? I can try to give you a little bit of dopamine here again. Now I'm giving you exactly what you want, and it's so nice. It's so nice. But that would be a little bit of a bad thing for our survival in the long run, if dopamine just worked like this, because then you could just stay on the tonic, right? Your music would sound something like this, probably. You can go on like that. So that would be kind of bad, and you wouldn't never learn something new. So in order to learn something new, there's different thing that dopamine also does. And we know this from these monkeys again. So now you've taught the monkey. You flash the light, or you ring a bell or whatever, and then it gets juice. Now you give them some juice that they also like, but they don't expect. So what happens? You flash the light, you get the dopamine, and then you give them the juice that they don't expect, it goes down, and then it says, oh, that was also very nice. And now you have twice as much of dopamine in your brains. So this ensures that we get up in the morning and make sure to seek out some new stuff that could give us even more dopamine, so that we're actually motivated to do stuff. But this is exactly what music does. Now I'll try to give you the second thing. Now I'll play something that you don't expect. So I'm sure you were thinking, even if I know, I'm playing it, so I know what's going to come.
But even when I'm doing this, I can feel that, oh, it's a little bit strange, that, it's actually very nice. So this is what music is trying to do all the time. It's setting up predictions that it either fulfills or it doesn't fulfill, but it plays around with these predictions. And now I would like to just play some chords. It's just chords, it's not really music. I just play some chords, but you should try to follow them around so that you can see how it actually affects you. This is just chords. You try to predict the next chord when I'm playing, right? Okay? It's not really music. It's just an exercise in kind of prediction in music. But there's almost this kind of landscape that you're going through emotionally when you're listening to just this simple principle. It's amazing what it can do. This simple principle, actually. But it's because you're playing around with your neurotransmitters in your brain. And this balance is something that I'm going to come back to, but it's crucial for the way that we are experiencing all kinds of music. It's basically also, now we were talking about theory, music theory just before, it's basically also the idea between playing inside and playing outside. This is the exact same thing that is going on when you're playing, and this balance you try to make between these two things. And if you're a really good composer, for instance, you're able to keep the dopamine system on its toes all the time so that you have exactly enough interesting stuff so that your brains will be following the music all along. Okay, now, I didn't know that this was a music theory class, but we have already covered 2/3 of the first year's pensum in music theory, because we've had melody, we've had harmony, and what is left? Rhythm. So I'll just take you through a little bit of a rhythm exercise here that will show you something even more important about the brain. So sit up a little bit. I would like this to sound good. You can do this. Normally, if I do public talks, I also do this, and it never works. But you can do this. It's just playing 3 against 4. So 4/4 meter here and 3/4 meter here. So we'll start with you guys. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do the rush. Very nice. I think this is the first time this ever succeeded. So I'm very honored. And of course, yeah. But what you can hear here is like before we had both in melody and harmony, we had the tension from the flat 9 to the 9th, and from the dominant to the tonic. This attention. This is a rhythmic tension. This is the same kind of idea with tension and relief that you have in rhythm, actually. So again, predicting the future. But here I would just like to try to make you understand exactly why I'm taking this thing. Because it's kind of difficult for brain scientists to understand, or at least it's used to be. Because what is happening what you were supposed to be doing was, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, before. But the interesting point, which all of you know, is that this is exactly the same thing acoustically that is happening in my fingers. But whether you count it off as a 4/4 meter or you count it off as a 3/4 meter, it sounds differently to our brains. It's like these, these images where you can see a vase in the middle or faces on the side, but you can't see both at the same time. You can sort of switch very quickly between the two things, but the brain will either take one stand or the other, even though it's exactly the same thing that comes into your brain. And this tells us something very deep about what the brain does. It says that what the brain is actually trying to do is not just taking things in. Brain scientists thought this 25 years ago. Brain scientists thought that the brain was making what they called representation. That means that stuff comes in and the brain builds a representation of the world. We don't think like that anymore. We think that what the brain is trying to do is that it's trying to predict the future, and it builds a model for predicting the future. So this model could be a 4/4 meter, for instance. 1, 2, 3, 4, strong, weak, strong, weak. This is a nice model for predicting the future. In Denmark and Germany we like that very much. We like a little bit less the 3/4 meter that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, strong, weak, weak, strong. So this is a different model for predicting the future. We don't necessarily, we don't notice that we do this, but we do that all of the time. We create this predictive model for predicting the future. If I go like this, then you already have a rhythmic model that goes down. Unless it goes something else, then you will change your predictive model. So the brain in general, what it does, it's creating a predictive model, and then it looks at what comes in and see whether that fits this model. And if everything just fits the model, nothing happens in the brain. Then the brain says, that's fine, I understood that, I can use my resources for something that is really important, something different. So that's, for instance, when your partner is talking to you. But I mean, but when something comes in that you have to notice, you have to actually, that doesn't fit this model, then your brain will say, okay, there's something that doesn't fit the model. It might be dangerous for me, or it might be something I could learn something from. And then your brain will start to experience the world, learn about the world, maybe even get pleasure from the world. And that's basically what music does and what we are trying to do in music. And now I'll come to my third slide. I only have 198 slides, so you better get to it. I'll come to my third slide here, because I would like to play you a small YouTube video of two children. I found this a couple of years ago on the net, and these are twins, and they're listening to their father's music. They're 11 months old. Look what happens.
Daddy's gonna play them a little song, and we're eating their keys.
Sweet, aren't they? I went back to my wife and I said to her, oh, couldn't we have a little new one? And then she looked at me and then she said, do you know that I have two sons, do you know our youngest son have just moved away from home? That's not going to happen. So my sons called her the leadership. for that. She takes the nice decisions, or the clever decisions, I would say. But anyway, what is interesting here is that these children do what every children, or all children do, is that they try to synchronize their movements, right? They listen to the music, of course, they move to music, and they try to synchronize the movements. We really like to synchronize with other people. Just check it out. Next time you see two people walking along the street, you're always walking in step with the other. So this is something that we really like to do. There are these very nice experiments where you put people on these rocking chairs, and then you ask them. They don't know each other beforehand. You ask them to move or to talk, and then they're just synchronizing their rocking on the chair, right? Even if the researchers has put like this 8 kilos on one of these, so it's actually almost impossible to do this. People will try to do it anyway. And if you then force them to be not synchronized and ask them afterwards, what do you think of the other person? Then they would say, actually, we just did a similar study in my center, where what we did was that we asked people to synchronize to another person and to the music. But sometimes this other person would be completely out of sync. And then we asked the participant, what do you think of the other person? And they would always say, oh, he's very nice, it's the experimenter, he's very nice. But then the experimenter unfortunately dropped some pencils to the floor, actually exactly, I think, 15 pencils. And then, when you saw how many people the person who was in the study picked up, then they would pick twice as many pencils up if they had been in synchrony as if they had been out of synchrony. So it's something that we don't notice, but we really like it when we're in synchrony with others. Also, when we play together, it's exactly the same thing that happens. We really like to be in synchrony when we play together. So anyway, this is something that is very important, but it's of course motor activity, and they also, these children, they also have some emotion while they're doing this, right? And then they also communicate along the way. And of course, music is, in my opinion, all about communication. But there's a very interesting thing about this video that you probably didn't notice, but I've seen it several times, so I noticed it. The mother is saying to them, okay, now Dad is going to play you a little song while you're eating your peas, right? What happens? Nothing. Of course, it's also in English. So, but anyway, they don't understand anything of what she's saying. But then when he starts playing, immediately when he starts playing, they say, "Oh, this is fun. We know what this is." And there are many researchers that actually think that we have music like a way of communicating even before we have the language, because language takes forever for people to be able to express anything in language, right? Whereas music is something that you already, when they're small, you have this, you kind of sing to them in a way, or the language that we use is singing, and of course we also sing to our kids when they have to fall asleep. So many researchers think that music and language are two things, a way of communicating that have evolved simultaneously for different purposes. Okay, but also very interesting here is that it's all about learning, which I'll come back to in the second half, where I'm going to talk about practicing also. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain. So the brain is something like this, and one of the big things that everybody knows today, but it was a really big thing when they discovered it back around 1900, is that different parts of the brain will do different stuff. So it's nowadays it's completely obvious, but it wasn't back then. So we have, for instance, the hearing and ear, the auditory cortex here, and in the brainstem there are different stuff happening here. We have the motor system, which are actually 3 different parts
where this is the motor cortex here, and you also have the cerebellum, and there's something called the basal ganglia in the midbrain. And I'm not going to give you a big lecture on this. I just would like you to understand one simple principle about the brain and the motor system, which is important for you. Because if you look at how the brain is organized, then the lower you are, the more unconscious what's happening is, and automatic things are happening. Down here in the brainstem and so forth, and deep inside of the brain is mostly automatic and unconscious. The more the higher you get up in the brain this way and out in the cortex, then the more you will be, the more conscious it will be. Just to give you an example, like this is the motor cortex. This motor part of the motor system is very conscious. It's what you use when you're starting to play an instrument. You probably, I mean, I remember when I learned to play guitar when I was 10 in school. In the beginning, I couldn't get my fingers to do the right thing, and then suddenly one day, oh, then I had it. So this was this goes from here, very slow part where it comes down and becomes programs that will run automatically down here in the middle when you learn stuff. So this thing is typically, this is exactly the same thing for the auditory cortex. Down here are things that you can't, you're not conscious about. Here you actually have, for instance, the different frequencies that you can consciously think about. Okay, the bass is deep frequency, the piccolo is a high frequency, and so forth. And of course, music is also about the limbic system. That is also more or less two parts, where you have the limbic system, which is deep in the brain, which is very ancient systems, and also something where you can think about what your emotions about stuff is. For instance, if you think about it, a good example is if you go to the zoo and there will be an animal, a tiger for instance, then immediately when you see the tiger, all your limbic system will be super fast and say, ooh, you have to flee, it's dangerous. There'll be a lot of different neurotransmitters coming out in the brain, dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol, all sorts of stuff will make you faster, try to make you faster to flee this enemy. But then there's a part here that says, okay, I actually did pay money to come into the zoo. And there's also bars between me and this animal, so it's not dangerous. And then you might actually get these goosebumps, you know, this the chills that you also get from music, for instance, where it might be dangerous, but some part of your brain will say to you, no, don't worry, it's not dangerous at all. It's super efficient because it means that you can flee very fast, but that you won't flee every time you're afraid. So that's very good. I should say that if you have any questions, please do answer along the way. If I'm going to talk like this for the whole day, it might be a little bit tough on you guys. But anyway, this is the principle of the brain, and of course the frontal cortex is something there where we have a lot of more space than all the animals. That's where you have more of a conscious idea of what's going to happen, where you can think about what you want to have for dinner and so forth. So you take many conscious decisions here. This was what I was talking about before, where you could either hear it as a waltz or a march, and we call this predictive coding. And now you haven't heard this word before, so I'll just say to you, I'm going to say predictive coding many times. It means that the brain is coding things in a predictive way. So it's basically the idea that you have a model, you create a model for predicting the future. That's what you are doing when you're learning stuff, is that you refine your models for predicting the future, and then you evaluate whether there's something that is different from that model in the incoming, and you update your model. Updating the model is what you do when you learn stuff.
I'll get back to that. And we have now, I was only saying that this for rhythm there might be different models, but of course in in harmony and so forth we have exactly the same thing. Because if I, for instance, now you have already a tonality for this, right? You all know that this is going to be this one, because you have learned this song probably from childhood. But just let's take it with a different tonality. Let's say that you have learned it as a minor piece. This kind of tonality is something that we don't notice, but it's there, this kind of framework, predictive framework that we are already installed with in a way. So there might be different things for this, and now I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example of what does this predictive coding actually mean for you when you're walking around in the world. I'm going to play a person speaking, saying something in English, but you're going to listen to it as if you had this artificial hearing. This is called a cochlear implant. How many of you have knows what a cochlear implant is? Anybody? Okay. There are very few. This is one of the biggest inventions in modern medical history. Because nowadays nobody becomes deaf. They get this small microphone implanted here when they are 9 months old, and then you sort of drill a hole in the skull, and then you put an electrode into the ear, and you are actually able to hear. It's pretty amazing. This thing, you know, the sign thing. Did you also have the sign thing with the corona, where when people were speaking, did you also have people translating into sign language on television? We had that in Denmark. I have no idea why, because there are only 1,000 people left in Denmark who speak sign language. But anyway, they did that in Danish. But anyway, so. But this hearing is of course not as good as normal hearing, but you can still learn, your brain will learn how to actually understand language. So try to see whether you can hear what the man is saying in English, okay? Anybody? Okay, now I give you what the man said, and then you hear exactly the same thing after.
The wife helped her husband.
Isn't that pretty crazy? And it's even more crazy if you think about what actually happened here. What I did now was that, or I didn't, but this slide did, was that it rebuilt your brain. And if you don't remember anything of what I've said, you need to understand this, because this is exactly what you're going through every day of your life. 2 seconds is enough to change something. Now you cannot, for the next 7 or 8 hours, every time you hear this, you will hear the wife help her husband. Then it will close again. So, let's try to think about what happens in the brain. What the brain does is that it has neurons that sends electricity to a synapse, which is a small space where if when the electricity comes, then you get neurotransmitters out, and it will actually it'll be I don't know how to say this, but the next neuron will get these neurotransmitters, and then it can send electricity. This is basically what the brain does. Okay? So when there's this principle, so when you have, for instance, the sentence, the wife helped her husband, it's like this delta, the wife helped her husband. So small different connections between the different nerve cells in the brain. Okay?
So, once this synapse has been opened once, the next 7 or 8 hours it will be much easier for it to release neurotransmitters here. Then it will close again. But the first 7 hours, once it has been opened, it will be easier to open. So that means that this whole delta is open for the next 7 hours. It's called long-term potentiation. So that means that the electricity will have a much easier time running in this delta than in other deltas. That's why you suddenly can hear, oh, the wife helped husband. Boom. Then you got it. So, the thing is, I get you. So the thing is that once you then keep on wanting to do something, for instance, okay, the brain says, okay, he really wants to learn how to play a C major scale on the piano. Okay, we'll put some myelin around this connection so it will be able to run faster. And the electricity will be able to run faster and smoother. And we might also build some more connections out here and other things. And we cut out some of the ones that we don't need so that we'll do it in the right way every time. And by doing that, you make it faster and faster and program it slowly, but surely you make a program of it. So this is basically everything you're doing every single day in your life. Okay.
My question is, when it closes,
yeah.
Does it close completely, or is it like the lid is a little bit open?
In
order to be ready to open again.
That's a good question. I wouldn't be exactly know this, but basically
that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's probably something like that. It's not quite as simple as it, but it is basically this thing that you can show with neurons. So this is basically what you're doing every day. So, this is predictive coding because now you got the model. Here you have no model, so it's just noise to you. Now you get the model for predicting every single word. The wife helped her husband. And now you have actually a model which is good enough for you to be able to decode this stuff. And this is exactly the same thing we will do with art. Because if you look at this picture, it's just a picture from the art museum in Aarhus. I don't know the artist, but I just took this with my own mobile phone. And what are you looking at in this picture? Anybody? What is the idea behind this picture? What are you looking at?
Mountain.
A mountain? Yeah, maybe. And the Ukrainian flag, of course. But I don't think that was the idea. What you're looking at are these two annoying bumps on this straight line. And actually, once you have noticed it, your gaze will go back and forth between the two bumps, right? So it'll go from this to this and back again. So the idea here is, of course, that every time you look at this, the brain will still say, oh, it's two really annoying bumps that it has here. And this is exactly what art does. Because our prediction is that that this is a straight line, this is a straight line, and these are straight lines. Everything if you look around, there's so many straight lines. So our prediction is that you have a straight line. But so these we call prediction error. This is something that doesn't fit your predictive model. Of course, you can take something which is maybe a more well-known artist. Do you know what this is? Do you know anybody who painted this one?
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. It's in Milan, and I took this also with my mobile phone just 1 week before Milan closed down for COVID. And this is just an amazing piece of work. If you come into this, I don't know anything about art, but my wife is an art historian, so I'm sort of dragged to all these places. And you get into this big hall, which is a writing hall, and in one end there's this picture, and in the other end there's a different picture. But this one is so amazing. You look at it and you just think, okay, this is really great art. This is, by the way, it's a real door. So it's just on the wall, it's just painted on the wall, and this really looks as if the the ceiling is continuing. But how is this composed? As you can see here, you have this line, and when something important happens, you sort of break the line. And then you have this really important thing. And this is the whole story of the picture. This is the finger of Peter, right? Peter is saying to Jesus, is it really true that I have to betray you 3 times tomorrow? I don't believe that. And by the way, it is this index finger. I mean, it's really interesting how this is composed and how easy it is to see this, even though there are so many nice details and so many nice colors and so forth. This is a whole overall idea about prediction and prediction error. Now, in the other end of this whole, there's another painting by an unknown painter, but from the same time, they probably got the same amount of money, to do this amount of money. I guess it's 1492 or something like that. And it looks like this. And when you look at it, it's just a mess. In my opinion, it's just a mess. You look at it and you say, okay, oh, there's something up here. So this is what we do when you want to create really big art. You have this very clear relation between prediction and prediction error. And we can measure this in the brain. So if we take a person and put electrodes on the skull here is EEG, you've all heard about that. Basically it's just measuring the different the different currents in the brain. When there's when neurons fire, then you have currents running in the brain, and if there's enough of them, you can actually measure it using this thing. And if you play to people, and this is one of my early studies here, if you play ding 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 every time the deviation comes, then the brain will respond with this thing. When you look at the brain waves, it will respond with this, which is called an MMN, a mismatch negativity, at around between 110 milliseconds and 250 milliseconds. After there's been a deviation, then you see this, the brain goes, oh, what was that? That was dangerous. So when you create music, then your brain will try to categorize it, try to make a prediction. When you go, okay, I understand this, now I can spend my time on something more useful. So it's first when you actually break the prediction. You create prediction and you break it. And we can actually measure this in the brain. I would like to also try to give you a composition here that illustrates this very much. We just released this last year, this LP with my family band, which was just for fun, but we ended up getting a lot of really good reviews on it, and I'm playing a long tour this next month actually. And we made this record only with Paul Simon songs, jazz on Paul Simon, you can say, called Further to Fly. This song, I don't know how many of you knows it, but if you are my age, everybody knows it, because it won the Grammy in 1975 or 76, this Paul Simon CD called Still Crazy, after all these years. But the interesting thing about this, because you can say, okay, all this stuff, do musicians and composers know this? Probably no. They just feel the music and then they write it. But this is underneath, and some of the musicians actually do know how this is supposed to be. And there's a very nice, interesting interview with Paul Simon in a talk show, the Cavett talk show host from 1972. He comes up, Paul Simon, and then he says to the Cavett, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about creativity. How do you compose? And then Paul Simon says, well, it's interesting because I brought my guitar. Probably he knew. So I've written this song, but I cannot get further. My ear wants something fresh
it needs something new here, but I can't figure out what it is. So he played the whole song, the A and B part, and it is exactly as it is on the record. And then he doesn't know where to so he ends on something like this. And then he says, so maybe I want something new, it could be this chord. It's a little bit rough. And then he says, I'm here, I take this. And that's a little bit too weak. And sorry, it's because I have this in me about it. But then he says, but then 3 years later, the record comes out, and then he has found exactly the right place. And I'll play this to you just to show you how this actually works in music. And it's so the two first A and B part is as this, and then you have to listen for this when he sings. It's, by the way, it's my oldest son here who sings 4 in the morning. So I have to listen for this and how this is. Turn it up.
She seemed so glad to see me, I just smiled. And we talked about some old times, and we made us some news. Still crazy after all these years. Oh, I'm crazy after all these years. I'm not the kind of man who tends to socialize. I seem to ignore all familiar ways. I ain't no fool for love songs that whisper in the ears. Still crazy after all these years. Oh, I'm crazy after all these years. It's 4 in the morning, I'm tapped out, yawning, longing my life away. I never worry, why should I? It's all gonna fade. It's all gonna fade.
And so forth. But this is of course pretty delicate, this thing, but when you listen to it many times you can really understand this. My ear wants to hear something new. And this can be a long, it can be actually a tough work to figure out how to balance these two things exactly. I'm going to talk more about that later, but now I would like to switch a little bit to say, what is then the creative process? And if you think about composing, I think there's one thing that is very important. I'll say now, if you think about the Paul Samuel song here, then of course he has a very specific purpose for his records. But if I'm composing, for instance, I'm typically composing to my quartet or my quintet, which might be with song or without song, but at least when I start composing, I always have a frame in mind. What do I want to compose? And here I would like to say that I think it's important, even though most of the times we just go to the piano, we see what happens, and then we write something down. But it's sometimes a very good idea to actually figure out what is it that you want to compose. For instance, do you want to compose a fast song or a slow song? What do you need for the CD? I'm always composing for a CD. So the framing is super important. I'll get back to why that is important. But also the idea. What is the idea? I remember a couple of years ago I was asked to do a masterclass on composition, and then I thought, okay, if I'm going to do a masterclass on composition next week, I might as well just try to write something for it. And I was sitting, and it was November, almost as black as now, and I was thinking, okay, my idea is that I'll try to create a composition that is November. It's called November Black, which is a very sad thing. So could I write something that sounded like that? So I started, of course, out with a minor chord. So this was just the idea that I got it sort of. This was looking out of the window, but I thought, could I make it even more black? So I went like this. It came about, that was the whole idea about this song. It's important to say you need to figure out an idea which is strong, because often you get this composition where you have one nice bar, another nice bar, and a third nice bar, and then you end up with something like the other painting, the not Da Vinci painting, which is just a mess. So the idea is super important. It has to be often very simple, more simple than you can think about. Then you have to think about who's going to play it. Very importantly, my band. I know exactly what my drummer likes to play and what he doesn't like to play, and what my piano player is good at, and so forth. And who's going to listen to it. Also, again, trying to think about, is there an audience for this? I'm getting too old to play stuff that is only interesting to the people on the stage, I have to admit. But there are many ways. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily do something which is very pop-like or anything. But just think, okay, is there an audience for this? And then I would say, for me, it took many years to trust my own taste. Like, I was sitting and I was thinking, okay, the last record, the reviewers, they didn't like this kind, so I'll write something that doesn't do this that they didn't like. It took a long time for me, and the record that I like the most of my own records is the one where my credo was that I wanted to do stuff that every time I would try to listen to it and say, do I actually like this? That was my best record ever. So trust your taste is a very important thing. And of course, try to get into flow. And I'll get a little bit back to this, but you know, composing or doing assignments or writing books like I've been doing, or papers, a lot of scientific papers, is about actually putting time aside to be able to get into flow. This record, for instance, was one that I was nominated for the Danish Music Award for, and the interesting thing for me about this was that it came about in a quite interesting way, because I knew that I had my holidays. I knew I had decided to write songs for a whole CD, and I sat down at the piano 8 o'clock in the morning. Nothing happened. 8:15, nothing had happened. I tried all my tricks, you know. Sometimes I do like this. When it doesn't work, I do like this. Usually something comes out of that. Nothing worked. 1 hour and a half later, I was thinking, this is not going to work. Then, by accident, there was some lyrics on my piano. Norwegian lyricist or text writer had sent them to me. And I took this piece of paper down and I looked at this. It was called My September Song. Okay, I'll try to write a vocal song. Why not? And then I wrote this song in 3 minutes. And okay, that was okay. I didn't think much of it, but it ended up being the whole idea for the record, and the first and best song on the record, at least when we had recorded it. And this suddenly happened, but it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't put time aside for it. I knew that I had the whole day, and I just had to stay at the piano. So this is very important. Get into flow, and you have to need
time for it. But it's also less inspiration than transpiration, as they say. Anyway, one thing that is very important for me when I compose, for instance, is that I try to stay between control and no control. That means that I sometimes go out like this, like I said, no control at all, and then I bring it back, so I try to go back and forth. And I'll give you an example of this just now, because some of you might have seen this, or at least how many of you have seen or watched the full 9 hours and 30 minutes of this Beatles video? Any of you have done this? None of you. The whole 9 hours is worth it. We were 3 guys, 3rd of January, and we sat in the couch, and then we watched this for the whole day. We played in between, I would say, so it took a long time. But we saw the whole thing, and it's actually worth it, because you learn a lot. It's also extremely tough to watch, because it's such a mess. Much of this is just noise. But I would just like to watch it. You can actually see how they created this thing. This film was made, they actually had footage of every day for 30 days because they wanted to make a movie of it. It became a terrible movie, but afterwards Peter Jackson took the whole thing and made 20 minutes from each day. So you can see how the Beatles actually worked when they were in the rehearsing room and in the studio. And it's really painful to watch, but you also see how they actually create. And what they do is that they have time, they spend an extreme amount of time trying to do all sorts of stuff. And most of the time it's no control, but there's also a little bit of control. And here you see how Paul McCartney actually creates Get Back. And when you know Get Back, it's like you want to say, but it's not like it is. Come on, get to it. Just watch these 2 minutes of recap from a long, long time how he actually made Get Back. And this is one of the only times in the studio where the others are completely silent because they know that there's something happening. Anyway, I hope it comes. This is kind of many things that I think are interesting with this. But one of the things that you can see is that he sort of keeps on in the same, he has this idea, he has a sound, he has something that he can hear, there's something inside this rock that I had to liberate. Like Michelangelo, when he was doing his stuff, like he's always said that he liberated the piece of art from the stone, right? But there's something inside. But then the tricky part here is that when you're doing this is to actually remember, listen to it and see, okay, what is good here? Oh, and hold on to what is good. This is really hard. I've had many things where I say, oh, this sounds really good, and I keep on going, and then I forgot what I was doing at this time. So this thing about really holding on to it and be completely concentrated, see how concentrated he actually is when he's doing it, right? That's something that I think is the key. This is concentration when you're doing this. But of course, and if you look at this, if you think about creativity, then, we've been researching a lot in creativity, and what we know about creativity is that it's super important to figure out what is the problem. And for music, then it's hard to say what is the problem, but in a way this is to narrow down what is it that you really want to be doing. And then, what have other people done? So this is something that many musicians are a little bit afraid of. What did other people do? Can I get some inspiration? But it's fine to have inspiration. The problem is, of course, always when you then get to the band and present your song to the band, what will they say? They'll say, somebody did this before, right? But it's important to figure out what have other people done. And an idea, he has a small idea here, but of course it also takes skills. And this is something, it's not just skills playing and so forth, it's skills actually being able to do this thing, being concentrated about doing this. And then it's all about putting time aside to it. It's amazing what you can do when you put time aside to it. But then collaboration. Afterwards, it's important to collaborate. And if you look at the brain, what you can see when people are most creative is that there's something in the brain called the default mode network. It's the completely relaxed network that you see, and this was very surprising to researchers to find out. There's a big part of when you're creative that is just completely letting it go, just lying in the grass and looking up in the sky and so forth. But then there's also a salience network. What is good about, what is it that I want to go on with? What is interesting? Trying to find out what is really interesting, and then taking decisions on what you actually want in the end. This is exactly what you see him doing here. And now I just want to get back from the rooftop, so that you are not left with this half thing. And yeah, it's just how it sounded when they actually played. It's interesting when you watch the whole movie, because they never really play. anything. And then suddenly, you, okay, they did actually know how to swing. But so if I should give you advice on how to become more creative, I would say there's of course advice for the here and now. What do you do? Well, I think you should use prediction error consciously. I don't know why I think I did. This is a Danish word for consciously. Sorry. And what you can do this is that you can create obstacles. What we all also know as tripping. For instance, do something and say, okay, I'll have to get out of my I have never done a song in 11/8, for instance. And try to create these obstacles to yourself that will bring you out of your comfort zone. Then you have to take chances. And a very important thing is, if you can't write a good song, then write a bad one. I mean, again, Paul McCartney is a very good example of this, because what he said, I heard an interview from, I think, 72, where there was this interview, and he was very, you can say, he was clearly starstruck, and the interviewer says to Paul McCartney, when you've written so many fantastic songs, how is it then to write something new or something? And then Paul McCartney said, oh, do you think I've written many good songs? I can only count like 4 or 5 songs that I really like. Most of them, he says, didn't turn out as well as I thought they would be. I had greater expectations for my songs. And some of them I really hate, he says. So but that just shows what it is. I mean, it's more the process that you should enjoy and not necessarily the result. And if you really want a good advice here is that say, okay, I don't have to write a good song, I can also write a bad song. And make it better. Anyway, so an important thing is to make time to think, make sure that you have time to do it. And I mean, we all can create time if we really want to, but we rarely do that. In the long run, if you want to become better, I'll just restate what Hal Crook, that I played the tour with many years ago, said, plan your work and work your plan. So you have to sort of plan ahead, and then once you're to it, for instance, if you want to rehearse, it's also really good advice for rehearsing. You have to plan what you want to rehearse. And then when you do it, then you all know that, okay, I planned that I am going to play the scale, and so forth in all keys, and then you play 3 keys and you think, oh, it might not work. I'll try some arpeggios instead, or whatever, and you play that for 2 minutes and you think, that might not work. I might just drink coffee instead. Right. Once you have made your plan, then you should work it. We can talk a lot about that a little bit later, but now I know you soon will have to actually have a small break. But another thing that I think is super important is imitate, assimilate, innovate. This was Clark Terry, famous trumpet player, who said this, and it's kind of trivial, right? The imitation is, of course, learning what Charlie Parker was, his solos or whatever you want to learn. But you also have to take them in so that you actually feel them. You can play like Charlie Parker, or like Jaco Pastorius, or like Paul McCartney, or whoever you're trying to imitate. And then, of course, innovate also. But the order is not like this. It's not like this that the first year you imitate, the second year you assimilate, the third year you innovate. This is the wrong way of thinking about it, I think. Because the thing is that you need to do this every single day. Make sure that you have all these 3 things in your rehearsal program for every single day. Because if you only start here, you might become good at innovating just in the here and now, but you won't get more new stuff in your compositions. But if you only are over here, it can be very hard to get out of this thing. I've had many bass students
became really good at playing like a certain bass player, Jaco Pastorius or Niels Henning or Petersen or whatever. They could come really close, but they would never really they would never get any gigs because it's easier to hire the one who actually found this out. So this thing should go with you every single day. And remember, in creativity, ideas are worthless unless you do something with it. So another thing that I am very keen on when I compose is that when I sit down and try to compose, my rule of thumb is that I have to have a full idea of the composition when the day is over. I will typically go back and readjust stuff and change stuff. Don't be afraid to do that. But I really want to have a full, when I compose, I want both an intro and outro. That's my credo. I need to have both an intro and an outro and the whole thing, an idea of how it should be played on the first day. Because the next day, you can't remember your idea, you can't remember it's so hard to get back to the original feeling, even though you think that. So ideas are worthless unless you do something with it. And very importantly, this is from Bill Evans, creativity is not a skill, it's a way of thinking. It's not some, and this is actually also research. There are many things that you're born with that are innate. Your ear, for instance, hard to do something about. It's very in the genes, but creativity is not. That's something that you allow yourself to be creative, and we are all creative. Just when we have to go to school or whatever, and there's an obstacle, we are creative in solving that obstacle. It's not a hard thing for human beings are creative. And I had a lot more stuff to do, but I'll end with this slide because I put together a really nice band. I don't think they ever played together. They could have, they might have, but I mean, 2 and 2, they would all have been playing together, I guess, in a way. But I was just thinking about the best band I could put together, in my own opinion, if I should think about the most creative band. And I was thinking about which words I could put on these players. If I was thinking about Keith Jarrett here, I think that novelty and the way he plays lines, I'll get back to that when I have the classes with you later, but the way the novelty and the lines, that his ability to create lines, he always plays something like this, not something like this, but you know, something where he has a note. So he always creates these lines that goes on a longer time scale. And the research shows us that when you have really good improvisers, they will not be thinking from bar to bar, but they will be thinking about the whole idea from start to the end. That's the difference between a good improviser and a not so skilled improviser. That is how far ahead their ideas go. So I would say novelty in lines. If I think about Miles, it would be creating space, both for himself. He would play and so forth. He would always be creating space between his phrases and for the other musicians to come in, which would be exactly why this music, his bands always sounded the best in the 50s and the 60s. Then when you think about Wayne down here, I would say this is economy. The way to actually learn to say the same thing with fewer notes. I love his, if you think about Joni Mitchell's The Mingus record, where he plays this, where he plays on the dry cleaner from Des Moines, his solo is just booty, booty, booty,
That's basically what he plays, because so much shit happens outside of him. So this is exactly what he hears and what is necessary. It's one of the best solos I know. Then we get to Jack DeJohnette, and that's about taking chances. Like Christian McBride, he said, well, the downbeat is where Jack thinks the downbeat is. He takes so many chances, so if he plays a song where you are not losing one downbeat, it's actually not a very good. He's not in form. He's not in shape. So that's about taking chances, and this is something that we really. That's also a personal, individual thing. I think how risk-taking are we? We made a study on risk-taking some years ago, and actually what you can see is that rock and jazz musicians are more risk-taking as personalities than classical musicians, which is kind of interesting. But you can think a little bit about that. That's both good and bad. Anyway, then there's also something that all musicians should think about is, and that's the reason why I've taken Daniel Pastorius. Of course, I have so many jazz heroes or bass heroes, but what is completely mind-blowing about his playing is that he reinvented the instrument every time he played. And you can even go back and then you learn something, listen to him and learn something about the instrument that you didn't know beforehand. So I think, and these things are things that I think is important to think about when you try to become a really good improviser. I guess I don't have more time now. But that's fine, because we're going to meet a little bit later. That's going to be completely different. And we're going to talk about groove and how to practice and other stuff. So I think I'll just say thanks for now.